Well, I press record. Oh, there we go. Awesome. Right, hi and welcome to BCS Careers Inspiration. This series is designed to introduce you to a range of different people who've chosen a career in technology. We'll hear from them about their background, their experience, and find out what their job's like. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Jess Enright, who is a lecturer at the University of Glasgow. Welcome, Jess, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So if we could start off with what you do in your job, what does it involve?
So I'm a lecturer in computing science at the University of Glasgow, which means that I have a really varied job. So lecturers spend part of their time teaching, mentoring graduate students, part of their time doing sort of administrative tasks associated with the university, and then part of their time doing research. In most years, my research is about finding new algorithms to solve problems mostly on networks or controlled diseases of animals. This year, during the pandemic, a lot of that research time, instead I'm spending modeling the pandemic, trying to figure out the impact of possible testing strategies or interventions, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's great. And you kind of hinted at that there, but could you give us a bit more detail about what you're working on at the moment?
Sure. Yes, I can. So actually, I'll look at I have a little list of Post-it notes of what I'm doing later today. So I'll pick the next thing. The next thing I'm working on after this today has to do with modeling how testing for university students might help control the pandemic in towns with big universities. So you'll know that it's been really a difficult situation for university students during the pandemic, kind of coming back and then having to go home to family homes, staying over Christmas, some not. Some universities have had big testing schemes where they test all students very regularly, and some haven't. So the bit of work that I'm looking at doing just after this is about trying to analyze what kind of impact those testing schemes might have in different scenarios of how infectious the disease might be, or different scenarios of how students engage in social activity, and use that to try and write papers and provide some evidence for what might be the best way forward under different kinds of assumptions. Other things I've worked on during the pandemic are sort of big population models of people moving around Scotland or moving around the UK, trying to figure out which regions are sort of most linked to other regions. So if we see, this was much earlier in the pandemic, or hopefully later in the pandemic when we see only a little bit of infection around, if we see a little flare up in one area, where do we maybe expect it to appear next? That kind of calculation. So there's some of that going on. And as I said, in my normal non-pandemic year job, I do exactly that sort of thing for diseases of cattle and sheep as well.
Okay, that's really interesting. I guess, yeah, the pandemic situation has thrown a whole new aspect into what you do.
Yeah.
And how did you get into doing this? Did you always enjoy science and technology? And how did you find out about this type of work?
Yeah, so I always enjoyed science in school. But I didn't do computing science or anything to do with tech really in secondary school, because my secondary school, I don't think really offered any in the program that I was doing. So I started university and I was deciding between doing biology and physics. And then at the end of first year, I picked biology, and I only picked up computing science and tech in the second year, when you had to take sort of an extra subject just to try some. And I really liked it a lot. And so I switched over to doing a 50-50 joint degree between biology and computing science. So I picked it up quite late in undergraduate, but it's not done me any harm, I don't think. And then from there, I stayed in school for ages because I really like school, I guess. So I did 2 degrees, a master's and then a PhD directly after that undergrad. And now I work at a university. So essentially, I've spent my whole adult life working in universities. But what I do within computing science has changed a lot over that time. So this year, I've been doing really applied work. So on real world data, on real world problems, where we're trying to make real recommendations kind of as quickly as we can, which is exciting, but also really scary that you're making sort of important recommendations that could be taken into account in big decisions. But when I started doing computing science, I was doing almost entirely theoretical mathematical work. So I've sort of zigged and zagged and weaved around in what I do, working on lots of different problems, which I really enjoy. That's one of the things I like about computing, is that it sort of turns up in all these different fields. Everybody needs a problem solved, and CS helps with that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that answer kind of leads quite nicely onto the next question, which is around what excites you most about what you do, and what you enjoy most about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, exactly. So I really like this aspect of being a generalist, right? That if I study algorithms, and by algorithms, I just mean a set of instructions to solve a problem. Algorithms as a word has kind of gotten a bad name recently. Turns up in the news as mutant algorithms or that sort of thing. But it can be a set of instructions that like the mutant algorithms to assign grades, or it can be something that's trying to find like the fastest way to route something along streets from here to here, or the best way to sort a whole deck of cards, virtual deck of cards usually, this sort of thing. So an algorithm is just a set of instructions for doing things. And I work on trying to come up with faster or better algorithms to solve problems using characteristics of the problem itself. So that's really let me work on a lot of different things. So I've done some work that's helped with sort of statisticians. As I said, now I'm doing infectious disease stuff. So infectious diseases of animals and of humans. I've done a little bit of stuff for plants. Way back in my earlier days, I worked for a while with some geneticists who worked on polar bear genetics and rhinos. That was really exciting. So it's let me work on a ton of different things and apply what I do to lots of different stuff, which I think is, it's got to be my favorite part of it.
Yeah, that sounds so interesting. Like you said, there's always a problem to be solved, and all the different areas that problem solving can be applied to it makes it really varied and really interesting, it sounds like. Definitely, yeah. And in terms of your typical working pattern, or if there is such a thing, a sort of typical day for you, what might that look like? And also, what do you enjoy doing when you're not working?
So my days, as you guessed, sort of can be very different from each other in my working day, and even within a day it changes a lot. So we've talked quite a bit about the research that I've been doing, but as I mentioned at the beginning, of course, a big part of my job is also teaching. So this year, this semester, I'm teaching first year computing science. So I'm teaching students who are sort of having one of their sort of first university computing science experiences. So on Fridays, which is today, I do some research. I meet with a couple of different groups, because right now I'm working in as a small part of a lot of big groups to help work on the pandemic. So I have a lot of meetings where we meet up with graduate students and earlier career researchers, master students, interns, and professors. So the whole kind of range of experience to talk about what we've been doing and try and make a plan for the next thing that we'll be doing, putting together different analyses. So I have a lot of those. And then around the middle of the day, I have teaching. So I'll run today a quiz for my students so they can check up on their learning from the past week, record some video lectures so that they can watch their video lectures and start working on practical material. Throughout the day, I also always watch for incoming messages, because students will email me or message me on Teams or whatever format they like to use, asking for a little bit of help with their programming or questions about their quiz performance. So it's a lot of switching back and forth. So I do the teaching. I do quite a few meetings discussing how other researchers have been working to combine our results together. But then I also spend a fair bit of time myself just writing code and trying out models and generating possible results. I do a lot of the kind of coding right now that does what we call what if scenarios, right? Because we have so many uncertainties right now in the world, especially around the pandemic. And so if I'm trying to model the pandemic, I'll sort of set up a simulation of let's say people in a town doing whatever they're going to do. And then I say, well, what if we had a new variant of the disease that was a little bit easier to transmit? What if everyone went back to normal social activity? What if we started up schools but kept out universities? what if wearing masks made it safer by 50%? And we don't know the real numbers here, but we can try out these what if scenarios that then sort of help us think about what might be a good option. So it's a mixture of meeting and teaching and answering messages and coding. So busy days these days.
Very
outside
much
of work,
so.
yeah, outside of work right now. So the main thing I do is walk my dog, play board games with my partner, because right now there's not a lot of kind of other activity going on. In normal times, I do a couple other things. I play rugby, which takes up quite a bit of time, especially as I'm getting older. It takes me more time to train to keep in shape and be able to play rugby with people who are a lot younger than me and have fun. So that takes up a fair bit of time. As I said, I play board games with my household right now, but in other times I also have some friends we regularly meet up and play nerdy board games, which I really enjoy doing.
That's very cool. Thank you. And for anyone watching who is interested in finding out more, who might be inspired by what you do and maybe even getting into this type of thing in the future, is there anything you would say to them or anything you would recommend they look at or try?
That's a good question. I wish I'd prepared some links for resources. Maybe I can gather something
we
up
can,
after.
We can put them in the link. Yeah.
We can coordinate for that later. Yeah. So this is, are you talking kind of specifically about the disease modeling type of work, or kind of more broadly about all of it? Yeah. So I'll kind of answer those separately. On the university thing, so as I said, I started undergraduate and then went all the way through to the end of a PhD, right in a row. And I kind of had in my head by partway through my undergrad to do that. But I know a lot of other people who are now computing lecturers or professors who didn't originally have that idea. And especially if you come from a family where not a lot of people have gone on to university. There's this phrase that I've heard recently online that I didn't even know was a thing, called first generation academic, right? And this is what they're talking about at the kind of PhD level. They're talking about people who they're the first person in their family to work at a university. It didn't even occur to me until I heard this phrase that there are people who work at a university as lecturers whose parents also worked at universities as lecturers, because that's not my situation. My parents didn't work in academia. So I think I know lots of people who have come through, and when they were going through their undergraduate, even if they really liked research, it wouldn't have occurred to them to think about further sort of theoretical or academic study, because you just don't know what it is. If you haven't seen somebody do a PhD, you've no idea what it is, right? It's very different to an undergraduate. It's more about doing things than learning things. You learn things during it, but it's not sort of from books or set exercises. You pick a problem and you're working on it, and by the end of it, you're the world expert in it. So sorry, it's a very long answer, which is just to say, I know that there are resources out there for people who will have never known what academic research is like, to give them an idea of what goes on in the average day, right? Like, for example, people will often, if I talk to them, think that as a lecturer, I either only teach, which is not true, or that for my research, I sit only sort of alone at my desk at a whiteboard, thinking really hard and staring at it. And I do enjoy that part of my job, but that's probably a minority. Most of my job these days is talking to more junior researchers and seeing what they're doing and trying to put things together. So I'll see if I can find a resource about that that we can add later. On the infectious disease side, especially now during the pandemic, people are getting sort of more and more interested in how these sorts of models work, because they're being used to make decisions that affect you, right? Like it's really important, I think, that if policy is being made about you and imposing things on you, it's really important that if you want to understand what's influencing that policy, you can, because that's how we keep our societies fair and understand what's going on. So I know that there are a couple of sort of introductions to that sort of information out there. I've seen a good one for younger readers, and here I mean probably younger than secondary school, about general disease modeling. And I think there are a couple of good ones that sort of start on lots of the terms you'll have heard in the news. So things like R number, infectious contacts, that sort of thing. So I'll try and find some links. But I guess the number one thing is that regardless of what you look at, be curious about it. And if you don't understand something, don't assume it's because you're dumb. Right? I do this all the time, and I'm totally a grown-up with a PhD in computing science, and I will read things written by people about the sort of research I do and think, oh, I can't understand this. Probably they've explained it really well and it's really correct, and I'm just being a total idiot. Almost never true. Everyone feels that way. So we'll try and find some references and put them below. But yeah, be curious about it. Don't be scared of it. It's not black magic.
Thanks very much, Jess. That was really, really insightful and really interesting overview of what you do. So thanks very much for your time and for joining us today.
Yeah, no bother.